How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another edition of the Startup Mac Vlog. I am Kiever Edward Conwell II, also known as Mac, and I have my wonderful co-host with me today.
Hi everyone, it's Kate Alegado.
How's it going, Kate? And today, for this week's edition, we're going to tackle something that's been really prevalent in the tech community and the tech space for the last few weeks, and actually for the last couple of years, and that's the issue of diversity. Lately, a lot of people have been talking about diversity in these larger companies, like Google and Yahoo. And as far as back as a couple of years ago, a big issue with diversity in startups, which led to the creation of accelerators like the New Me Accelerator, which I took part of, which is geared directly towards minority and underrepresented uh, communities in Silicon Valley. So that's where we're going to start.
Let's start small though first.
Start small. Sounds good.
So Mac, how about you tell us your experience being that you are a minority yourself and you are a startup founder?
So yes, I am clearly African American, minority. Um, I've ran a startup for 4 years. I went to a historically black college and university, and my experience with diversity in the tech space, um, it's interesting. So when I started my company, my first one given to my two co-founders, I had no idea what a startup was. I had no clue what TechCrunch was or what Y Combinator was or Hacker News or any of that. I just happened to be a developer who had an idea and I wanted to start working. And as my business grew, I realized the fact that I didn't know all these things starting out was a big hindrance, as well as the fact that I didn't have a network to tap into that I just naturally built based on my community and people around me. And those were probably the biggest hindrance I had in the initial phase of starting my company. And that has a lot to do with the community I come from, being African American. Being a community, there aren't a lot of startups or a lot of people who happen to be business owners around me who can share that knowledge, who can mentor me. People I go to college whose friends and family members were business owners. Like that network wasn't there. Um, but once I started networking and getting to know people and actually diving into the tech community, especially here in Baltimore, Maryland, our local tech community, diversity itself, the fact that I was African American wasn't an issue. That was never a hindrance. Um, the biggest hindrance was whether or not was how hard I was willing to work and who I was willing to meet. Like once I started meeting people, started talking to people, started networking, people opened up, and people of all genders, all races, all colors were there to help. Tech community is very helpful, especially when they can see that you're a hard worker, when they can see that you're growing, that you're putting effort into things, and they can see you in the community doing more than just talking and showing up at events, but actually, acting on what you're trying to accomplish. That goes a long way. And so, yeah, my initial experience with diversity wasn't a bad one. It was just there weren't many people that looked like me in the community, but that didn't stop me. There were plenty of people willing to help me. You know, Plenty of influential people willing to help me and talk to me and guide me, which I am so thankful for and grateful for. Because the tech community, people say it's very much a meritocracy, and it's more so meritocracy than probably any other walk of life I could think of. If you can code or if you're a good salesman, if you can build and get people to buy into a product, that's all people care about.
So you said that it was a lot easier for you, but I know that that's not the case for everyone out there. Did you have any of your colleagues, friends, or just people that you are acquaintances that had a far more different experience than you?
I'd say yes. A lot of people. There are several people I know who did have different experiences than me. The thing that helped me was I'm a very open person. I'm very talkative. I like networking. I'll talk to and meet with anybody. But a lot of times we see when people first start networking, they initially gravitate or look for people who they feel like they can identify with, who look like them. And when you start off in a journey where you can't find a person like that, it can be a little taunting. It can be a little scary. You don't really know who to turn to, and you can be uneasy about it. I just had to learn not to worry about that unsettledness, because at the end of the day, your gender, your race, none of that mattered when it comes to giving advice and wanting to be helpful. Because people in general want to be helpful. And generally, people want to be helpful. They want to, give advice, and they like to see when they give advice and people heed their words. So it's just getting over that initial unsettledness of being unsure and being unsure of yourself. Like coming from a community where being in a startup or owning a business isn't talked about as much. So then the idea of doing it yourself, it's a lot of unsettledness. It's a lot of questions and not knowing how to handle that. So that can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say people have to do their best to overcome a lot of their fears. That's what a lot of it comes to. It's just fears. A lot of what we do in the startup community is overcoming your fears and being comfortable being uncomfortable.
Okay, where that comfort is, I'm going to go on a level step up. So we just started off in terms of your personal experience and just being a startup within the startup world, so to say. But how about we bring it up to the city in general? So maybe Baltimore, DC, or even New York. Those tend to be the metropolitan cities that are fairly close to us. Do you see any diversity concerns, issues that have gotten better or that are still standing?
There's definitely some issues. You don't see a lot of diversity in the field of technology, in the field of startups, in the field of engineering, just in general. A lot of that has to go to education and exposure. I was exposed to engineering at a very early age. I built my first robot when I was in middle school. Not many people from our community can say that. So a lot of that goes to communities and exposure. And so in Baltimore and in New York and, pretty much in the tech community as a whole, because I've been a software engineer professionally for 8 years now. I worked for a lot of companies. I've met with a lot of companies. I've been inside of Google. I've been inside of Facebook. I've been inside of PayPal. I've been inside of eBay. You don't see, when we talk about diversity, you don't see a lot of women. You don't see a lot of African Americans. You do see people of other races there, more than just white Americans. But in particular, you don't see as many women or African Americans. And a lot of that's cultural differences and community differences and educational differences. So those are harder problems to tackle. The one thing I've learned is a lot of these companies aren't necessarily overlooking minorities or don't want to talk to minorities or are scared to talk to minorities. It's just that talent pool isn't as large as it is in other communities, other races.
Well, so you said you went to Google and all these really big tech companies. How was your experience there in terms of seeing diversity? Or was there none?
There were plenty of people of Asian descent, of Indian descent, Arab descent. There weren't many. There were almost no African Americans. There weren't that many women. And all the African Americans I met at Google, only one of them was engineer. The rest of them were kind of in sales. But that's not from a lack of wanting to hire minorities. I think a lot of people are getting stuck on these numbers of these companies only have so many minorities that work there. But you got to understand, Google's hiring process is the same no matter what race you are. I have several friends who have applied to Google and gone through their hiring process, like who have gone through the full entire hiring process. So like with Google, you typically have an initial phone call, a phone interview, and then after your phone interview, they fly you out there for like an 8-hour interview. It's like a 5-part interview, and that interview is the same, no matter what race or gender you are. The bigger issue, I think, is the education system in the communities we come from. So the reason why I think there's such a diversity issue is, yes, one, a lot of these companies don't know where to find minorities who have that talent. That's a real issue. But beyond that, there isn't a huge pool of people from diverse communities and genders who necessarily have the level of talent that these companies are looking for. So yes, you may be African American with a computer science degree. That's great. It doesn't mean that you have the skill set at a level of what a Google would want. You could be a very proficient developer, but these hiring processes for these companies are really tough, really stringent. And from what I've seen, it's not based on, do they look at you harder if you're African American or if you're a woman. No, it's can you do the work that we're putting in front of you? Do you look at the problem the same way we look at it? And that's the real issue. It's not that these large companies don't want to hire diverse people, don't want to hire people of color or different genders. It's one, they don't know where to find them, and when they do, their work isn't at the ability or the standards of those companies, which is hard for me to say. Coming from historically black college and university, which I won't name, and school I love dearly, but I have to say, coming from that computer science department, there's no way I could have got a degree in computer science from my university and gotten a job at Google. It just wouldn't happen. And that goes for a lot of historically black colleges and universities. And I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of hate, and people are gonna argue this point. But look, I have a lot of friends that went to these universities and colleges. I know a lot of extremely smart people who have done great things from these colleges and universities. And I have to tell you, they don't prepare you the same way a Stanford does. And the universities aren't trying to change their programs to do better, because they feel like they're doing just fine. Because all of the students that they graduate with a computer science degree or engineering degree all get good jobs. And that's true. But getting a computer science degree and getting a job at a large military contracting company requires a different level of proficiency and skill set than getting a job at a Google or a Facebook. It just does. And I know this for a fact because I've worked on one side and I've seen work from the other side. And, I've been approached from these larger tech companies about applying and been recruited. I've seen both sides. I've seen the level of work, and I know the difference, and that's hard to say. And I'm just being very real and honest on this issue, that the majority of African American minorities who are going to come out with these skill sets are going to come from universities that cater towards the African American population, and those universities are not preparing them to get a job at a Google or Facebook. They're preparing them to get a job as a software engineer, giving them the basics they need for them to do a good job and do, web development, software engineering. But it's not going to be at the same level. It's not going to be at the same intensity. And conversely, that goes for a lot of universities in general. And then on the other side is the lack of exposure to other races and genders, to STEM education, to engineering, to math, to sciences. The level of exposure at an early age and engagement is lower, and so that's why you don't see as many women graduating with computer science degrees. And then the ones that do tend to have really strong skill sets, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going out looking for um, that job at Google, because it's also a really competitive talent. It's a really competitive hiring pool.
Mhm.
So where all these companies are looking for engineers and software developers. If you got a computer science degree, you put your resume out on Monster, you're going to get hit by a million recruiters and companies just off the bat, and you're going to have your pick of companies to go to, where the hiring process is going to be a lot easier than the one you go through Google.
Yeah.
You'll have companies who will just hire you just because. My first my first job when I dropped out of college was as a DBA, and when they interviewed me, they pretty much told me what the job was and asked me if I wanted it. And when I told them I didn't have any database in my background, granted, I had gone to college for 3 years and I never took a database course. Like, that just wasn't part of our computer science curriculum. And I told them I didn't have any database background, and they were like, "Oh, that's fine. We'll bring you in, and within the first 3 months, we'll send you to a course. The sooner the better. But we'll be able to get you caught up, and if you can, maybe start learning a little bit about database on your own." Now, I was able to take that, and I taught myself a lot about database development. Then once I was on the job, I was able to learn a lot from my coworkers, to the point where I didn't have to take that class. But just the fact that I had a skill set where I would be able to learn that and comprehend what was going on was all they needed. And they could do the rest from there. So there's also, a lot of pull for that, because here on the East Coast, everybody talks about Silicon Valley, and that's where all the talent is for engineers. Here on the East Coast, we have a lot of the intelligence communities,
Mhm.
the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. They employ a lot of engineers, a lot of them, from all walks of life, diversities and races and genders, and they're just as skilled for the most part as those in Silicon Valley. But they were just approached by a different company at the right time, and now those companies on the West Coast missed out on that. Like, that's very real. There are so many engineers and developers. There's so much talent, from the D.C., Maryland, Virginia metropolitan area, engineers, that it might even rival that of Silicon Valley, honestly, that people just wouldn't know about.
Well, I think if you're going to compare West Coast and East Coast, I mean, they're definitely targeting different industries in terms of Silicon Valley is just known in terms of the tech side. Well, here, I mean, we do a lot of, like you said, intelligence, cybersecurity, very government, political industries.
That's
But
true. But when you're coming out of
yes,
college, you're not thinking about that. You're just trying to get that first job.
yeah, it's very true. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's definitely the institution that you're coming from and the information that's provided to you at an earlier age.
Yes,
So I think it's very hard to have control of that without actually being in I guess at the beginning of it would just be educational status.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
the educational part is a huge part of it. Um, you know, I know for a fact that some of these larger companies, like your Googles and your Facebooks, your Yahoos, they want to work with universities. They want to be the first to see the top talent pools. But then at the same time, those universities have to be willing to reach out to those companies and develop those partnerships. And if a company tells you, like, "Hey, we would love to work with you, but your computer science department just isn't up to par with our standards. These are the
Mhm.
things you can do to change it." Well, then the presidents and the deans at university have to be receptive to hearing that. And
Mhm.
at some universities they're not. You know, that's just a fact.
I think it's the professors that can make a big difference.
Um, yes, that's definitely true. Professors can make a big difference, and it also depends. And like you said, your professors. What kind of professors do you have in your department? You know,
Yep.
if you have the professors who are very proficient software engineers but haven't been in industry in the last 20 years, who don't keep up with current events, who don't
Mhm.
know what's going on in the current tech boom, well, then you might learn how to code really well and have absolutely zero context on what's going on around you.
Yeah.
When you're a student, everybody tells you should read, TechCrunch and VentureBeat, know what's going on. But if you're a student and you're focused on, your schooling and your grades and, school takes precedence and then your personal life, you might not get a chance to get exposed to some of those things. I know I wasn't, you know. And if you don't have professors who are in the know and push you to do those things yourself, you might miss out on that.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I have to be more of like a realistic perspective where if I don't have the right resources right in front of me or people that are willing to mentor and guide you in a particular way, I mean, unfortunately, at the end of the day, in the beginning and end of the day, it's our control. So we have to be the ones that ask the questions, that does the research. If no one can provide that opportunity for us, then I mean, would you say? I mean, like you did exactly the
Um,
same thing on your end.
I did, but I didn't until almost 4 years after I left college. So, yes, you need to ask the right questions and things are in your control. But how do you know what questions to ask when nobody's ever told you that those exist? Like, I didn't know startups existed. I didn't know there was a tech community in Baltimore. I didn't know what a startup was. I didn't know that when I learned to code in college, I could use that to build something amazing that could be a company within itself. Like
So
those
would
were,
it so would it be the responsibility of the community and the not just the education system?
um, I would say it's part of the responsibility, part of the community. The community definitely has responsibility for that. So like your local tech community should be going to local universities and spreading, the knowledge. And that's all universities within your community, not just
Hmm.
any particular ones. And I think it's got to be part of the of the educational system of the universities themselves. They need to have programs that deal with current, up to date practices. Technology is a different field, so it's a different way of going looking at education. It's not like accounting, which accounting is going to be the same whether it's today or 30 years ago. There may have been some differences in practices and some new techniques that have come out, but the very basics of accounting and what it is stays the same. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas with technology, the basis of the logic behind software engineering hasn't changed, but the languages we use, the things people look for in industry, the way the industry is moving, like
Hmm.
all of that's changed. Like if you have a computer science department that doesn't offer mobile courses in mobile technology, that's a problem. And that exists. Like there are universities for computer science departments that don't have a mobile component. Like that's real. They don't
Just
have
because they haven't adapted yet.
right, they haven't adapted or they don't have deans that are willing to know what's going on in the current up to date. Like the dean from my university didn't know what Instagram was. And this is the week Instagram got sold. Like the week Instagram was sold, the dean of the computer science department had no clue what Instagram was. Like how is that person going to lead a department to help educate young people for their future careers? Like you're completely limited. When your teachers have never heard of TechCrunch or VentureBeat, well then how are you supposed to know that? It's
True.
it's a harder issue than just use the resources around you. Because yes, the resources exist, but you can't use them if you don't know about them. I found out about these resources myself years later. Like I wish I knew about half of the stuff I know now back when I was in college. I wish, as opposed to, children, kids who go to Stanford, you go in year one learning all about technology and the startup community and all the power you have as an engineer, as opposed to you're learning computer science just to get another career. It can be bigger than that, but you have to have the right people around you to expose you to that. And when you don't, I feel like it's a breakdown within the community, within the education system. And if you don't have those initial things pointing you in the right direction, then there's no way for you to know how to use the resources to your advantage. Because you don't know those resources exist.
I got nothing.
It's a hard problem. It's a very hard problem that hopefully somewhere along the line we'll be able to figure out and solve. I definitely want to be part of the solution to that.
I would say that whoever ends up watching this or whoever is on right now, if you have a solution or know of someone that potentially has an element to the solution, please do share it with us. Because, I mean, if you look at us, we're both minorities. And I have the upper hand in terms of I am also a female.
Yes.
So help us. Help the community.
And you want to talk about females in the tech community.
Let's not start that right now. We can totally do that in a different conversation, which would be far more prolonged.
Oh, okay. I have my own thoughts on that too, which is it's rough for y'all. It's rough.
Yes. So hopefully, maybe in the next vlog, or if not, a few vlogs later, we'll discuss about women in technology.
But I will say, for those out there who are minorities, who feel like it's hard to make it in the tech industry, I'm proof. I am a larger African American male with a really scruffy beard and locks.
Can't miss those dreads.
Can't miss the dreads. And I've found, while there will always be people who judge me based on these things, and that's not a technology or a tech community or Silicon Valley thing. No, Silicon Valley, and it's not racist or anything like that. That has to do with just human beings and people in general. Are there racist people?
Judging people.
Yeah, are there judgmental people in this world? Are there racist people in this world? Yes.
Of course.
Is it true that there may be judgmental or racist people within the tech community? Sure.
Of course.
Every community. But everybody's not like that. And the majority of people aren't like that. And
we hope so.
And the thing I've learned is people recognize talent, they recognize hard work, they recognize dollars. Like, at the end of the day, nobody cares what you look like if you have a company that's making money. If you have a company that's making money, then who you are, what you look like, where you come from, means absolutely nothing at all.
It becomes very transparent.
Yes. Like, that doesn't matter.
No.
So don't be afraid of all the headlines, the things you're hearing. It's possible to make it. It's possible to do it. There are a lot of people out there, different minorities and genders, men, women, who have made it, who have done well, and they're not anomalies. It's possible. You have to remember that everybody started somewhere. So you can't look at these people who made it and think, oh, they're anomalies. I could never do that. Oh, nobody wants to help me. That's not true. There are people that want to help you. There are people who are willing to help you. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and be vulnerable enough to tell people what you're doing, who you are, and why you're so freaking great. And don't be afraid to tell everybody why you're so freaking great.
Because everyone's great in their own particular way.
Right. And if you're freaking great, people will listen and they'll watch and they'll see. And you can tell everybody you're freaking great, and that'll get everybody's attention. And once you show everybody you're freaking great, well, you're good to go. That's what it's all about. So I think that's it for our vlog today. Please, send us your comments, any questions you have. Anything you would like to see us talk about on future blogs, please send them in to me and Kate. Our information will be in the space below if you're looking at this on YouTube.
Yep,
and look forward to seeing you next week. All right, bye everybody.
Bye everyone. Good chatting.